And welcome. Thank you for taking your lunch hour to be with us today. My name is Tara Feiner, and I am the Senior Director of Jewish Family Services, or JFS. Today, we are thrilled to be partnering with Kate Elder, PJ Library Coordinator, and JScreen to bring you From BRCA to Tay-Sachs, a modern approach to Jewish genetic screening. Since our program today is just one short packed hour, we want to get right into it. I will introduce to you today's speakers, and they will tell you more about JScreen and their stories. Hillary Regelman is the Director of National Outreach at JScreen, and Shari Ungerleider is the Outreach Coordinator at JScreen and parent of Evan. So without further ado, I introduce to you Hillary Regelman to get us started.
Thank you so much, Tara. And I know we'll be hearing from you in a little bit regarding your own personal story. But thank you all for having Shari and I here today to present about a really, really important topic that has the capacity to really impact each and every one of our lives. So with that, I'll get us kicked off on really what we're going to be discussing here today in terms of Jewish genetic diseases and really what makes some of these genetic conditions and hereditary cancers more common within people with Jewish ancestry. We're going to start off our talk really discussing reproductive genetic risk, really genetic diseases that can impact just our future kids. And then we're going to end things with BRCA, the BRCA gene, as well as cancer genetic testing. So with that said, we're really talking about Jewish genetic diseases here. And this is really quite a misnomer because people think like, oh, well, Jewish genetic diseases, that's an exclusive disease within the Jewish community. That's actually not the case. And it's very far from what's actually, fact. So yes, there are certain conditions such as Tay-Sachs disease that are more common in people with Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi Jewish ancestry, but it's not exclusive to the Jewish community. And that's a really important note as we're going through this presentation. So everyone is at risk for these things, including interfaith couples or interethnic, whatever the couple might be. And Tay-Sachs disease, for example, in the first part, we're talking about carriers. So we're not talking about individuals who are affected by the disease, but rather people who are healthy carriers unknowingly in most situations, but have the capacity to pass it on to their future family. So whether it's their first child or fifth child, each pregnancy is at risk if it is a carrier couple. So when we're talking about carriers with Tay-Sachs disease, for example, it's about 1 in 30 Ashkenazi Jews is a healthy carrier of Tay-Sachs. Again, meaning they carry it, they don't have it. Within the non-Jewish general population, it's about 1 in 300. So as you can see, the risk is still there. It's just much more prevalent within people with Ashkenazi Jewish background. And it's very similar with the BRCA, the BRCA genes as well. So, and we'll get into those risks, but it's about 10 times more common within the Ashkenazi male and female Jewish community, more so than the general non-Jewish community. So with that said, I want to kick things off discussing this reproductive carrier screening. This is really essential for anyone of reproductive age, so really in that 18 to 45-year-old demographic who's either going to be planning for their first child or, for subsequent pregnancies, in the future. And this is really essential. But with that said, I really want to get it started with my colleague, Shari, who's going to really speak about her family right now and how reproductive carrier screening and Tay-Sachs disease played an important role in her family history. So Shari, I'll let you go ahead and take it away from here.
Okay, thank you, Hillary. My first child, Evan, was born in August of 1994. My husband and I were so happy that after 9 long months of anticipation, we were blessed with a beautiful and healthy child. We had the joys of watching Evan develop normally for the first 6 months of his life, and we also had the normal hopes and dreams for his future. During the next few months, we started to become concerned as we realized that Evan wasn't developing at the same pace as other children his age. We witnessed his friends begin to crawl, sit up, walk, stand, and interact with each other. But Evan wasn't able to do any of this. He just watched and smiled. But soon his smile began to lessen and his observing became a distant stare. He couldn't stand or even sit by himself. He started to become irritable and wanted to be held all of the time. He also began having trouble swallowing, which made mealtime stressful for both he and us. We fought the tendency to compare, and instead, we considered it his differences to be within an acceptable range of time for development. At 10 months, we took Evan to the pediatrician for what we thought was a standard well visit, but this turned out to be the beginning of our nightmare. After several months, visits to numerous doctors, and endless tests, Evan was diagnosed with Tay-Sachs disease. This news not only devastated us, but also shocked us because I was tested for Tay-Sachs during my pregnancy and told that I wasn't a carrier. I immediately contacted my OBGYN, who upon re-examining my records, discovered that I had actually tested positive as a Tay-Sachs carrier. Our lives had now changed forever. We now had to deal with the fact that even with the best of care, Evan would likely not live to reach his 5th birthday. We immediately met with a surgeon and decided to have a feeding tube inserted so that Evan would be able to stay properly nourished and medicated. We decided to have a fundoplication inserted at the same time so that as the disease progressed, it would be less likely that he would aspirate on his food or his secretions. Due to Evan's inability to move on his own, he had to undergo several hours a week of physical therapy so that his muscles wouldn't atrophy. He became blind and deaf. He developed seizures and would have several dozen a day. He also had very bad respiratory problems, which required us to provide chest physical therapy and to suction him regularly. We decided that we wanted to care for Evan at home so that we could spend as much time with him as possible. Due to the certainty of an early death, but the uncertainty of the exact timing, we made sure that we didn't take a moment of his life for granted. Evan lived until he was almost 4.5 years old. His disease obviously impacted our entire family. He required care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, due to lengthy tube feedings, round-the-clock medications, and multiple breathing treatments daily. Evan was truly an angel and was loved by everyone around him. Some of my best memories from when Evan was alive are when we used to go to the park, the pool, or the beach. But instead of packing picnic lunches and toys, we were dragging around the necessary medical equipment that Evan needed throughout the day. We now have 3 other healthy children. With each of my other pregnancies, I was able to have my screening updated for diseases that were added to the panel. Knowing that my husband and I were carriers for Tay-Sachs disease, we were able to make family planning choices that enabled us to have healthy children. We chose to get pregnant naturally and had a CVS test performed at 10 weeks with each of my other pregnancies. From the bottom of my heart, I believe that every couple should be able to make accurate decisions based on accurate genetic information. I feel that it's a parent's responsibility to protect their child from pain and suffering, and that begins from the moment of conception. We are so blessed to have our other children. However, it does not take away or replace the tremendous loss that we feel for Evan every day. I constantly imagine what my life would be like and what our family would be like if Evan were still alive. As a result of Evan's illness, I became an advocate. And to honor him, I decided to turn my family's tragedy into something positive. I've been working on this mission of education and awareness about carrier screening for over 25 years. Having a child with a genetic disease made me recognize the importance of raising awareness not only about the disease, but about the importance of carrier screening. It's essential that everyone who is planning to start or add to their family seek preconception carrier screening along with genetic counseling to determine if they're at risk of having a child with any of these horrific diseases. The purpose of preconception carrier screening along with genetic counseling is to identify couples preferably before pregnancy and to help them understand the impact of the disease that they carry on the child and also to present them with reproductive options that are available to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. This is a photo of, merge this so everyone can see. This is beautiful baby Evan, and then this is his 3 older siblings. So Sherry mentioned her other healthy kids. So this is her family, and it's never easy to hear her story, but the point of this is so, all of our lives can be impacted by Evan's memory, and we can take this information that we're learning and really become advocates for the importance of genetic testing, and not just genetic testing, but genetic testing the right way. And nowadays, there's many more genetic conditions than just Tay-Sachs that we're really lucky that we're able to screen for and help prevent tragedies in our own families. So one thing that I want to mention that Sherry touched on was that if you are starting or expanding your family, that you need to do genetic testing. And that's a really big misconception that people have. And I know, we're partnering with PJ Library on this talk, which all of those families, you all have, at least one child, right? That's why you're in the PJ community. And it's essential if you're considering adding to your family that you either get tested for the first time or in between pregnancies. And the reason is really stemming from this Punnett square. So if there's a carrier couple, meaning the father and the mother both carry the same genetic condition. So like in Sherry's case, right, both she and her husband carry the Tay-Sachs gene. If someone doesn't carry the same one as their partner, then they're not at risk to pass on either of those genetic conditions. So someone could be a carrier for Tay-Sachs and the other for Gaucher disease, then they're not at risk to have a child with either of those conditions. But in the case that they are a carrier couple of the same thing, then each time they get pregnant, there's a 25% chance that their child will be affected. So it's not guaranteed, of course, but it's important to know that every pregnancy has an independent risk. So someone could have 3 healthy children and the 4th one is affected, or vice versa. They could have 3 affected children and the 4th one is healthy. So that's why it's so important for couples who haven't been tested or only for a really limited number of diseases that they're updating their panel in between pregnancies. Also, from the time Sherry had her first child to subsequent pregnancies, there was more diseases added to the disease panel. So, and that's still the case, right? From when J-Screen first started till now, there's been many more conditions added. So it's important that people are staying on top of that. And this is just a graph just to show now we're at over 200 conditions. Who knows, next year, the years following, how many conditions we'll be screening for. But it really did start with the Tay-Sachs screenings in the 1970s. And that was because there was a lot of Tay-Sachs babies passing away from this condition, and they identified the gene and people were able to start screening for it. And it happened in a mass way. And I say that because JCCs and Jewish communities and Hillels and synagogues, everyone was promoting screening. There was community events. They were setting up blood drives across the country. So if you ask many people who were married in the 70s and early 80s, and if they were married by a rabbi particularly, they were probably screened for Tay-Sachs disease. And it worked so well, screening in such a mass way, that it eliminated Tay-Sachs by 90% within the Jewish community. I mean, that's staggering. And you can see this chart depicts the number of cases in yellow within the Jewish community. It's really plummeted. But then within the non-Jewish community, since they're not screening for it as much as the Jewish community, the number of cases, is still seen. And so we're really trying to promote a pan-ethnic panel where everyone is getting tested, including the Jewish community, including the interfaith community, because you never know what you can be a carrier for until you're tested. And since the 70s, of course, many more conditions have been added, as I mentioned. So a big misconception we're constantly hearing is, well, my husband or I were screened for Tay-Sachs, and now our children who are of childbearing age, they don't need to get tested because we did. And that's wonderful that you were tested, but it's so essential that they're screened for not just Tay-Sachs, but also the many other conditions, 220 plus right now that we're testing for, so they can ensure, that their next generation isn't inheriting whatever genetic conditions they and their partner carry. So some really important facts that I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about. We hear quite a bit that, well, I don't need to get tested because I don't have a family history of this disease. Well, Sherry didn't have a family history of Tay-Sachs that she knew about, nor did her husband. And that's because a multitude of factors. One could be, well, you can come from a long line of carriers, but until two carriers come together, you never see that disease show itself, right? Or you could have come from a family where, someone passed away years ago, maybe a grandparent's sibling or a great grandparent's child, and it was a cough or something else, right? They didn't know that it was one of these genetic conditions that's newly researched. So perhaps they just, swiped it away as a common cold or whatever it might have been. And maybe it actually was one of these genetic conditions. So you really don't know. The second thing is that there's no stigma to being a carrier for these recessive genetic conditions, right? We're all carriers of something. Just on our panel alone of the 200 plus conditions, about 75% of people who come through and get screened are a carrier for at least one thing. So it's not weird. There's no stigma. In fact, someone could be a carrier for 4 things or 5 things, and you just don't know, because the only way to know is either to get tested or have an affected child. That's it. There's no other way of knowing. DNA is invisible. And most of the time for these recessive genetic conditions, we have no symptoms and we're healthy. So screening really is the only way. And for the couples who are carrier couples, and as Sherry mentioned, right, she has 3 other healthy babies. And there's many different options. And I just wanted to mention some of them here. Firstly, all the conditions that we test for are detectable through an amniocentesis or chorionic villus sampling. And at that point, the doctors know what genetic condition to test for because the couple underwent genetic testing. So they can actually test the embryo after the couple conceives naturally. And at that point, the couple can make a decision if the child is affected, on how they'd like to proceed. In some cases, the couple says, you know what, we're going to proceed, and this disease happens to have a therapy, or, an alteration in diet could help the baby. So it's really up to the couple as to what they'd like to do. In the Orthodox circles, many couples choose to do screening before either meeting or before getting engaged, and then opt to break up the relationship before it gets any more serious if they are a carrier couple. Some couples choose to use a donor egg or sperm from a non-carrier, and a really, really remarkable technology that's newer is IVF, so in vitro fertilization, but it's coupled with genetic testing. So it's a really, really advanced way to be able to have a baby free of the genetic condition that the couple carries that's biologically theirs. And of course, the first step of this is doing genetic testing to know that you're an at-risk carrier couple. But it's amazing to know that there are options, for moving forward as a carrier couple. So with that said, I want to switch gears and get into cancer genetic testing. And the reason this is a bit different is that while yes, there is a risk for our children, but there's also a risk for our own health if we do carry a mutation in one of these cancer genes. And I'd like to introduce and welcome back, really, Tara Feiner, who's going to share her own personal story with BRCA, the BRCA mutation. So Tara, I will let you take it away.
Great. Thank you. So when I was speaking with Sherry last week, when we were in preparation for this presentation today, we started talking a little bit about the session in Sharsheret. And Sharsheret is an organization that provides support for Jewish women and families who are at risk for hereditary breast and ovarian cancer. And Jewish Family Services is a partner with Sharsheret. And in addition to that, I am a peer supporter for Sharsheret. And so as part of that, I was asked to share my story. And those of you who have been part of the community for a long time may have sat through my story. So in 2017, as a partner with Sharsheret, I did presentations through the community at each congregation, teaching about the BRCA mutations and weaving my story through about how it plays through the families and can play through the families and educating. So to share a little bit about my story and how this can impact families, my mom was diagnosed at the age of 36 with breast cancer and unfortunately passed away when she was 43. And so the recommendation at the time was for me to start cancer screenings when I was 30, which I did. And I started mammograms at the age of 30 and soon after started a regimen of mammograms and MRIs. And at the age of 36, I had a read on an MRI that my doctor didn't understand. You know, I hadn't heard back from her in a timely manner. And I called her, I said, listen, I haven't heard from you about my MRI, what's going on? And she said, well, I'm trying to get clarification on this line. I said, well, what does it say? And she said, it says probably benign. And the hairs on the back of my neck stood up because I remember my mom having a similar kind of reading. And I reached out to my mom's oncologist from 25 years prior, had a conversation with her, and she said, listen, I really think you should go speak to a genetic counselor and get tested. The tests didn't exist when your mom was alive, and you really should go. And so at her convincing, because I had a conversation with her that said, listen, my understanding of genetic testing is that I can carry a genetic mutation and get cancer, or I can carry a genetic mutation and not get cancer. What's the point? And she talked me through the risk factors, how it was not just breast cancer, how it was also ovarian cancer and other cancers, and how the level of risk, and it was just not that simple as my understanding. And I'm sure Hillary will talk through some of these statistics, so I won't go into all of that. And so she convinced me, and I went, at that time I was living in Philadelphia. I moved here from Philadelphia 8 years ago. And I went to the Abramson Cancer Center. And I met with a genetic counselor and I went for the testing, and I do carry the BRCA2 mutation. And my world sort of turned upside down. And I was originally someone who swore I would never go through a mastectomy. That was too radical. But I did decide to do that. It's not something that is pushed at all, because for breast cancer, at least, there is very good monitoring. So my risk factors associated with the mutation were 60 to 80% chance of breast cancer. And once I had a breast cancer in one breast, 50% chance of breast cancer in the other, and then 30 to 40% chance of ovarian cancer. And then no more than 5% chance pancreatic cancer and 5% chance melanoma. So those are the risks associated with my BRCA2 mutation. Can't change the skin I'm in. I need to go to the dermatologist on a regular basis, sunscreen. And the pancreatic cancer is something that we'll start monitoring later in life. The breast cancer, like I said, monitoring is good. However, I chose to have prophylactic mastectomy because my mom's breast cancer was extremely aggressive and it grew very quickly. And I didn't want to have to catch it and then monitor it. So I chose to do double mastectomy with reconstruction in 2009. And the ovarian cancer, though the risk is lower, 30 to 40%, there is no good monitoring. Ovarian cancer, they tend to catch later when it is more advanced. And so I did a complete oophorectomy, hysterectomy. And I did them all at once. Unfortunately, I was very healthy. It was prophylactic. And I said to my doctors, if you can all play nicely in the sandbox, go for it. They all played nicely in the sandbox. And that was after conversations and revisiting, do we want children? They're tough conversations to have. You know, my husband and I were not planning on having children, but we went back and revisited the conversations again. And so in 2009, had those conversations. Since that point in time, I have two brothers. So once we knew that I carried the gene, we didn't know for sure that my mom did, but that meant my mom had to. One of my parents had to. Odds are it was my mom, which means it had to be one of her parents. Odds are women and men can both carry the gene. However, women and men have different risk factors when they carry the gene for what they carry. If it's a man, they have lower risk factors for the different mutations for the different cancers. I apologize. So we think it was through my grandfather, but the gene doesn't dilute over generations. So every generation has a 50% chance for each child passing it on. I'm sure Hillary will talk about this. So it's considerations for my brothers, whether or not they carry it. And then if they carry it, whether or not their children will carry it. So it's something to think about and something to watch. I went through with the surgeries. There was a lot of people missing in my family and want to be here for my brothers, for my husband, for myself, for all the kiddos that call me Aunt Tara. I am not pro-surgery. I am very much pro-education, pro-knowing what your genetic makeup is so that you can make the best decision possible for yourself to mitigate your risk so that you know what to do for you, make the best decision possible for you. So since 2009, I do a lot of public speaking. I am a peer supporter still sort of through the Philadelphia circuit. I'll get calls and through Sharsheret. And I just tell my story and I help people think through what they want to do to make the right decision that's right for them. Get the facts, understand, and make the decision that's right for you. And that's what's important. Know how to mitigate your own risk and do what's right.
Tara, that was beyond insightful. And I think, I hope many people watch the recording of this as well, and share this information with their family members, because you touched on so many of the points that I think a lot of people don't realize. And a few of those we'll get into, but such as men are at risk, right? Not only for the BRCA genes, but for these other genes. And I think a lot of people think this only affects women. Many times it's passed on through the male lineage of the family. And also, as you hit over and over again, it's not the same medical management steps for everyone. Some people choose to do preventative mastectomy and others just choose to do frequent monitoring. And I think how you said it was just so poignant, right? That you pick what's right for you, but the first step is knowing, right? You have to know if you're at increased risk. And when we're talking about risks, it's not low, right? Some of these could be upwards of 87% chance of developing breast cancer. And I'll get into some of the statistics for the BRCA genes particularly. But thank you so much for sharing your story and for being an advocate for JScreen's genetic screening and Sharsheret's resources, because that's why we have such a strong collaboration with Sharsheret, in that people need the resources to be able to make these informed decisions, after finding out if they do test positive for one of these cancer gene mutations. So thank you again. I do want to touch on some of the themes that you covered so eloquently. And one is that this is dominant inheritance. So autosomal dominant is very different, unlike recessive, what we were talking about with Sherry's story and Tay-Sachs and those reproductive genetic conditions, because unlike recessive, where you need a double dose of the mutated gene, so one from mom and one from dad, here you need just one mutated copy to be at risk. So most of these hereditary cancers that we're talking about are inherited in a dominant way. So if you carry one of these mutations, then each of your children is at a 50% chance of having that mutation. So again, that doesn't mean that they're going to have cancer, but it means that they're definitely at an increased risk. And then it stemmed right from one of your parents gave that mutation to you and one of their parents gave it to them. And right, this happens in families. Sometimes you don't see the cancer show itself, which we'll discuss about people who have mutations and, seemingly cancer-free families. And then other families, like in Tara's situation, right, her mother passed away from it. So, and it's very, close, obviously to your heart, and you're more involved in knowing about your history. But some people have no idea about their family history for a variety of reasons. So that's why this sort of information can be very, very insightful. I do want to focus today on the BRCA, the BRCA gene, because Ashkenazi Jewish men and women are at 10 times greater risk of carrying a mutation in their BRCA genes than the general population. I mean, that's a huge risk. Again, that doesn't mean it's not seen in everybody. In fact, there's many even recent examples of people who I was just reading a few weeks ago, the tennis star Chris Everett. She's BRCA positive and just caught ovarian cancer at a very early age, and her sister, who was also a tennis player, passed away from that same ovarian cancer, who was also BRCA positive. So it's seen in everybody, but we're seeing it much greater prevalence within people with Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, men and women. I can't keep saying that enough, but we need to make sure the men in our lives are getting tested. So I hope this is starting to make sense to everyone. And this is just a really, really fascinating slide about what is the risk, right? And this shows the difference between people who have and don't have a BRCA mutation and their risk for different cancers, right? So for breast cancer, in the general population, it's about 12% risk in a woman's lifetime to develop breast cancer. If she's BRCA 1 or 2 positive, I mean, look at the risk. It's well over 80% in her lifetime. That's a huge risk. For ovarian cancer, the risk is high too, especially for a BRCA1 mutation. It could be over 40% versus less than 2% for the general population who does not carry a BRCA mutation. With men, there's still a risk for breast cancer, although it's very low, but the risk for prostate cancer is actually, much more significant. And the risk for pancreatic cancer for both is there. And I know Tara mentioned melanoma is also associated with risks for BRCA. So, there's many types of cancers that are associated with these mutations. And as I mentioned, one of the things is that people think they only need to be getting tested for BRCA or these other cancer genes if they have a close family history. And that's one of the most important things about getting tested the right way, through a genetic counselor, through having your physician involved, because it's essential to take a really strong family history to understand, what's going on, where is this stemming from, and have someone guide you through the whole process who's an expert in this, as opposed to just doing something like, an ancestry.com for medical information, right? That's not the appropriate way to get medical information. And so if BRCA mutations are inherited, then why don't we just rely on a personal or family history of cancer to determine who needs testing? Well, we really can't. And that's because about 50% of the time that we're finding a BRCA mutation, there's no known family history of these related cancers. And that's for the following reasons. Either there's a small family size, so you haven't seen the cancer show itself, you have limited information, so perhaps it was lost in the Holocaust, or in other ways, maybe family didn't speak to one another. Maybe it was a predominantly male family and those cancers were at a lower rate. So breast cancer didn't show itself, pancreatic, prostate, or it was kept private and no one discussed this. And not everyone with a BRCA mutation gets cancer, right? Just like not everyone who is a carrier couple for these reproductive genetic conditions has an affected child. Not everyone with these cancer mutations gets cancer. So it's important to know, if you want this information, the only way to know is to get screened again. And we can't, harp on that enough. And it's not just for the BRCA gene. So perhaps you were screened 10 years ago as part of a big study. I know there was a lot going around in the country for the 3 BRCA founder mutations. We're actually screening for many more mutations in the BRCA genes these days, but also we're screening for other cancer genes. So there's cancer genes that are associated with colon cancer and stomach cancers, and over 40 types of cancers that are associated with the cancer genes that are currently on our panel. So it's essential that, we're doing a comprehensive test, and you might test positive for one that you're so surprised to learn. But the point of this particular panel is that they all have actionable next steps, right? The point of this is to be able to take this information and do something and act on it. So some of them involve maybe a lifestyle change, such as changes in diet or reduction in alcohol consumption. Others might be preventative double mastectomies or an oophorectomy or removal of the ovaries. Perhaps someone tests positive for the APC gene that's associated with higher incidences of colon cancer. Well, maybe it's a 31-year-old male who wasn't planning on doing a colonoscopy for 20 years. So he's going to want to start colonoscopies ASAP, and definitely more frequently than the recommended 5 to 10 year range. So he'll work with his physician on a medical plan moving forward. People can also use this information for reproductive options. So I know many women, particularly that I've been speaking to, who are in their 30s and planning on having children, they say, you know what, I don't want anyone else in my family to have this mutation. I'm going to use reproductive technology like IVF, what we discussed before with genetic testing, to only implant healthy embryos that do not carry that same mutation that she carries. So for example, if she's BRCA positive, she would work with her reproductive endocrinologist to only implant embryos that are free of the BRCA gene. So she prevents passing that on to subsequent, children, which is, obviously really remarkable that it can really stop with her generation. But again, everyone is different in what they choose, but the good news is that there are options and there's medical management and observation techniques. And of course, each one is different in and of itself, depending on the cancer gene that people test positive for, because they're each correlated with different types of cancer. So really, just in a nutshell, to wrap everything up, the purpose of genetic screening is being proactive. It's giving you knowledge that you can do something about. We like to say knowledge is power, and it couldn't be more true. And this information, we're talking about genetics and hereditary conditions. So if I find something out, then I can alert my family members that they're at increased risk for the same thing that I have. And hopefully you'll take this information to be an advocate for genetic screening in the Dayton community, and we can get more people, armed with this information so they can make powerful and impactful decisions for their own lives and really help keep the community healthy. So the testing is super simple. Both panels are accessible at jscreen.org, and it's all an at-home test. So it's just saliva. We were built for this pandemic, it seems. You don't even have to leave your home. And when someone registers on our website, our genetic counselors are looking over all the information on the back end, and you'll be mailed a saliva collection kit. You provide a sample. There's prepaid postage. You mail it back, and then a few weeks later, you can do a genetic counseling session with our genetic counselors. And at that point, they explain the results, they answer any questions, and make sure you know what to do in terms of next steps. And testing is available to all 50 states. So if you have family members who don't live in Ohio, we can mail them the kit. And our goal is to make this as simple as possible for everyone to access genetic screening in the right way. We do have a PJ Library code for you all to use today. We already subsidize testing greatly thanks to our generous donors, but we'd like to subsidize it even more for you. So if you use PJ Library 50, that'll take $50 off either test on our website. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Can you talk a little bit about, I know when we originally spoke, planning for today's session, we talked a little about the way that information is shared with the genetic counselor and the client or patient, as well, the individual, as well as with the primary physician, that the individual's doctor gets involved. Can we talk about that
Yeah,
process?
so we definitely include the person's personal physician. So on the registration form, you'll alert us to who that is. They will get a consult letter of everything that was discussed with the genetic counselor. And obviously we want your physician to be involved in the next steps, whatever that might be. So if it's an OBGYN and they're obviously involved in the care for, planning for a pregnancy, they'll have that information and then can arm you with more information regarding reproductive options. And if it's someone's primary care doctor, let's say they did the cancer genetic test, they'll have that information to discuss with the patient in terms of what should the appropriate next steps be. Does a specialist need to get involved, depending on what cancer gene that patient tested positive for. So both our genetic counselor and the person's physician are going to be on the same page. And I think that's so important, in addition to providing people with support networks where it's other people in their same situation, groups like Sharsheret, who can give them information about living with breast cancer, or taking care of a family member with that. So, we really try to wrap it up and think of everything that we can in terms of next steps for the patient. And Kate, I also just want to thank you for getting PJ Library involved, because so many of the parents, I think, are unaware of the need for screening, especially the reproductive screening, after they've already, thank goodness, had one healthy baby. So we just want to make sure that they know that they do need to update their panel or get screened for the first time before adding to their family.
Yes, definitely. And this is information that I didn't know. I have 3, thank God, healthy children. My husband is of Ashkenazi descent, but information that I didn't know. So I'm sure many families are in my same position where they are not aware of this. And a lot of our families in our community are, trying to get pregnant or expand their families.
And one interesting thing is that many women are only offered the reproductive genetic testing once they're already pregnant. So with JScreen, we're really trying to put this information out there before couples are family planning and, get pregnant. So this way they can take advantage of the options, if they wish to, before getting pregnant, or else the options are very limited. So that's really one of the big things we're trying to achieve. Aleka, do you have a question?
Yeah. Oh, you're muted.
Is your sound turned down, Aleka?
Do you want to type us your question in the chat?
Technology. You have
Yeah.
to
I know, right? I want to also just, bring an important point up about, subsequent pregnancies. And, if you're screened through an organization like JScreen, it's very easy to know if your panel is the most up to date or not, because, they're going to keep your records and they're going to know what diseases you were tested for. So it's very easy if you were, tested in 2010 to then contact JScreen and say, have there been any diseases added to the panel since then? It's important for everybody to keep a copy of their test and to be able to have, a resource to get back to say, is this the most current up-to-date panel? For both.
No, that's a great point, Sherry. And we alert people too when there's changes, just so we're staying on top of them as well. And we're really active on social media. And that's really the point of, we've recreated what happened in the 70s and 80s with the initiative in a really modern way, right? This at-home testing idea, we're all busy, we come to them, but we're also putting this out there in a very modern way, using the power of social media and just really using a lot of, look, we're having this talk virtually. So using the power of the digital sphere as well to get this on people's radar. So Aleka's question was, what about 23andMe? How is JScreen different than something like that? So I'm really glad you asked this question. We're very different. 23andMe is fun and cool if you want to know ancestry stuff, or, if you like things like cilantro. It is not a replacement for an actual medical genetic test. So they're using inferior testing where they're only spot checking It's called genotyping. They're only spot checking the gene for common mutations. They're doing a handful of these genetic conditions, not everything. So they're missing a lot, and there's also no medical involvement, which is, when it's a medical test, there has to be medical involvement. So that's why, yes, we seem similar in terms of we're at home and on saliva, but the testing technology is totally different. And the way everything is stored, right? We have to hold the most HIPAA compliant and privacy. Everything that we do is stored in an encrypted database. And right, so you want to do something like, we're the same as going to your doctor's office. So if you do something like that, where your results could be shared or sold, I don't know what the privacy is with that, but it's very different.
And it's also different. I mean, you would touch upon the medical part of it, but nothing substitutes genetic counseling, because if you receive pages of a result, I mean, as a layperson, I would have no idea what that means. So, how could you be expected to understand what those results mean and what the implications are for other family members? So the genetic counseling is really the key component there. I think Aleka had another question.
Can you be diagnosed? So can you be diagnosed with a condition but not actually be a carrier? So there's many, obviously, conditions in life that aren't genetic. So the answer is yes. So what we're talking about are genetic conditions, but things like Crohn's disease, or they're learning more about it, but we're not specifically screening for a Crohn's, gene. So there's things like that.
One other point, though, there are a few diseases on at least the reproductive panel where, we're typically looking for carriers, but something like Gaucher disease, you could be, found to be affected with a disease like Gaucher disease and not have known that because the symptoms were, something that,
very mild. Yeah.
Yeah.
But with that, you would have tested positive for Gaucher disease. So.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for having us today. I really hope, we can make a positive impact on the Dayton community. And if anyone ever has any questions or wants to get involved with JScreen, they can just go to our website, jscreen.org, and there's a lot of information. There's ways to get involved. And we hope to be part of future community events.
Yeah, definitely. Hillary, thank you so much for this presentation. And Sherry and Tara, when you were sharing your stories, both of you, I had tears in my eyes. I mean, this information is just invaluable to our families and our entire Dayton community. And I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing all this information with our community. And, Tara and I will certainly do everything we can to get it out to as many people as we can.
Thank
So
you.
And Kate, I want to just thank you also, because you recognize the importance of this, and just like an outreach email that I sent around, and you immediately recognize how important this information is to share with your community. So thank you for taking the first steps and getting us introduced to the Dayton community.